Hello, Culture Matters podcast. We're back again with another culture topic. You follow me on Jay Doran underscore the culture man on Instagram. You see short videos on business, culture, life, etc. And today I'm elaborating one of the topics, which is the role of accountability in building a strong culture. The role of accountability in building a strong culture. Why these videos are important, I think, is because I could only explain so much in 2 minutes, but if we go a little bit deeper, maybe I can unpack some of where I some of how I came up with the assumptions that I'm putting forth on Instagram around these topics. So the role of accountability, well, why I think understanding accountability is important for a culture is because that word is confused constantly. The 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 top down obsession with accountability, I actually think is an is oxymoronic in its nature. It's self-defeating. Because if we're talking about accountability as a company, it's likely a consequence of a lack of responsibility from those discussing it. Now, who's discussing it? It's often, it's often, I want to say, be careful of always. It's often those higher in the pecking order, higher in the hierarchy, talking about we need accountability, we need accountability. If that's manifesting, it's actually a consequence of the lack of responsibility. So let's define these terms first. And I've been trying to poke some holes in this for some time with guests, asking them what they think about this, which is, I think responsibility is modeled, and and I'll explain it. Accountability is given in speech or taken by force. Taken as in I quit or you're fired. Given in speech as in I can speak or I can't, or I believe I can or I believe I can. Accountability and responsibility is modeled. It's demonstrated. It's represented in behaviors. So individual responsibility, the ability to respond, is modeled. It's recognized. It's seen. It's experienced. Accountability is it, it's outside of the individual. It's now we're getting in the realm of group. We're getting in the realm of the other, of they, right? Those outside of myself. I can be responsible on a spectrum of higher 0 to 100 of the ability to respond. 0 being maybe I'm dead. 100 is a martyr, as said. Kierkegaard said, "When the tyrant dies, his reign ends, and the martyr dies, his reign begins." What the heck is that? Well, values transcend hierarchy. Values our meta accountability. Values. It's no coincidence that values come as a consequence of the martyr, of that heroic figure, of that divine figure. They are, and that's why you in these business books they talk about them being the glue that holds it all together. The importance of values. They're like guardrails of behavior. They hold us accountable, or they mold, they shape accountability, which is a drawn out, a filtered out or an abstracted out representation of responsibility of the individual, like the highest individuals in a group of people. The highest, as in, this reminds me of chapter 1 and Beyond Order, rule 1. Do not carelessly denigrate social institutions and creative achievements. That idea that Peterson's making an argument that those that rise highest in the hierarchy, they're looked at as they know what to do and why to do it and how to do it. There's an agreed upon unspoken proposition that they're up there for a reason. Now, of course, and this is where the accountability conversation comes in. There's exceptions to that as a group, as a hierarchy becomes corrupt from corruption, from acts of taking more value out of it than giving in. a person in a position of leadership that takes more value than gives in. This is where I'm going back to that disengaged leader. Disengagement is an obfuscation or a negation of responsibility. And when there's an obfuscation or negation of responsibility of the leader, the person, ultimately everyone is saying, wow, I'm inspiring to this idea through this, the brokering of this person or persons, the leadership. When there's an obfuscation or negation of responsibility, organizations become very top heavy and preach and talk and pontificate about the necessity of accountability. But the people are going to follow the leadership. That's a more clear way to say it. But I think we have to define these terms to understand where the problems actually lie. The role of accountability in building a strong culture is accountability comes as a consequence of responsibility. Responsibility is modeled, it's acted out. So here's an example. If we if the if there's someone that's working for us and with us that we do not believe is the person, no amount of accountability is going to change that. It's going to come down to the responsibility of the person above them to tell them the truth, like meaning tell them their part of the truth is what they think. Now they're going to get a feedback loop of what that subordinate thinks. There's your truth, my truth, the facts, and the truth. We have to have, as Rousseau would say, we have to have a conversation. We're going to have a conversation. And in that direct communication, we're going to figure out what's really going on with that subordinate. I think it was Mancuso said, people don't fail organizations. Organizations fail the people and resource in it's either the wrong person, the wrong position, the wrong tools. That was a helpful abstraction. The wrong person, the wrong position. You hired that person, the wrong position, the wrong tools. We're going to figure out what's wrong in direct communication. That's fundamental in the responsibility of management. That's going to have an impact on accountability, because accountability is going to come as a consequence of people modeling behavior, seeing how the leaders act and interact. And of course, as the organization grows over time and the values become etched in stone, they add to that accountability by making it clear on how we do things around here, how we don't do things around here. Part of responsibility is telling the truth, and part of that is having those direct conversations with people that you think are not, something's wrong. And then of course this becomes more nuanced when it's like, well, how do you have those conversations? Are you just telling everybody that they're wrong and they stink, or are you taking the time to meet them where they're at, listen to understand, listen to hear what is unsaid, sharing what your points of view are, being able to take back what their points of view are, and ultimately make the decision? Because the person in position of that can say no and yes, or yes and no, the person ultimately above the other in the hierarchy is going to have to decide, is this person staying here or not? Now, some of the variables that create a ton of dialogue around accountability in the absence of responsibility is when there are people that aren't being told the truth of how they're perceived by the organization, and they're also not being let go, and no one's happy. It's like nobody's happy, and there's lots of rationalizations to why that occurs, and then brings me back to disengaged management. It's like there's a long line of people, great talent out there, and organizations need to be constantly recruiting talent and bringing new talent in, just like bringing new customers in makes it easier to not hold on to customers for too long. And when they're disengaged, they're not bringing new talent in; they're bringing new customers in. And that's where it goes to the entitlement that manifests itself as organizations become larger. People higher in the hierarchy have time to not actually be as sacrificial as they once were, to not put in as much work, to not put in as much blood and sweat and tears. That has a serious negative impact on the culture, on the organization. And my belief is through the distraction and the lack of direct conversation, organizations become entitled and resentful. They start to decay and eat themselves. Essentially, they start to compete internally as opposed to cooperate internally and compete externally. So the role of accountability in building a strong culture, um, which is the topic at Jay Doran underscore the culture man on Instagram. I hear some thoughts. I'll just read my thoughts. First we have to understand distinction between responsibility and accountability to even understand how responsible am I actually being? Because accountability comes to us, and responsibility is what we do through. We're doing through our experience in the world. Like the more responsible we are, accountability will come as a consequence. And the more, because think about it, I can be responsible in my task and irresponsible in dialogue around how I did my task. Those are two different. It's like what versus um, how and why and who. Like I could be hyper specialized in what I'm doing and unable to burden any type of feedback from any party outside of myself. Like accountability doesn't happen through the individual; it happens through the group relating to the individual. It's based on feedback loops. It's outside of the individual. So the more responsible, the higher degree of ability to respond, self-awareness, it's been relegated to emotional intelligence, the ability to cooperate with others, as well as be specialized in the domain. The the greater likelihood of accountability occurring because it happens from others speaking and interacting with an individual. An individual's responsibility, one can be extremely responsible to customers and irresponsible to peers, and that is natural in many respects. It's like the maturation of a founder to a CEO. Oftentimes it's a different person because they're different psychologies, different educational backgrounds, different experiential developments. Just there's a learning curve to it, and obviously because I'm of the belief that founders can mature into CEOs and they can stay. There's just because every founder is a CEO, but not every CEO is a founder. Every CEO is not a founder, but every founder is a CEO, and that implicit designation of CEO doesn't infer the behaviors akin to a great steward of a business, someone that could bring the best out of people. They may not be able to be that person. They may just be able to bring an idea to fruition or bring the best in a sense out of the marketplace. Start something versus finishing it is oftentimes two different human beings because there's two different they're actually opposing or run antithetical to each other. One of the conversations I had with Phil Mancuso actually brought this up, which was, sales, don't ask questions you don't know the answers to. Leadership, don't ask questions you know the answers to, or only ask questions you don't know the answers to. There's a very good big difference in psychology, in behavior, in the outcomes. Unless you want to be surrounded by people that are not thinking or are afraid to think or cannot think, that's going to be lonely and discouraging and exhausting and anxiety creating. And yeah, when we bridge accountability and responsibility and they break down, that's the thing, they break down as growth occurs, as conflict, as life. It's a constant breakdown, rebuild, breakdown, rebuild. So responsibility is the glue of ownership. The ability to respond is the glue of ownership. I have pride in what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, based on having a belief that I know what I'm doing, feedback loops that I'm actually, I'm succeeding. There's enough tension where I may not succeed, that like gap between the belief I'll succeed and not being sure I will. There's an excitement there. There's an anxiety there that becomes exciting, and Peterson would argue, I think that process is either meaningful or it isn't, or it's a meaningful pursuit, right? Chapter 2 in rules, who could I be, right? Who could you be? So yeah, responsibility is the glue of ownership. Accountability are bricks based on memory bank. Accountability are like the bricks, memory bank. It's others. Yeah. So accountability includes the other. I'm not holding myself accountable. I'm responsible on a spectrum, and others hold me to account, or I'm not permitting them to. I could be overly controlling, yeah, overly controlling, and not let others hold me to account. But I, at the same time, it could be extremely sacrificial and um, extremely involved in whatever it is that I'm doing, and it won't be recognized how irresponsible I am as it relates to feedback. And that's a manifestation of uh uh the overly the edible mother, the overarching leviathan in the culture, the you know the dictatorial, it's too, the pendulum is swung too, there's almost, you could say, they're too engaged, or they're, that's where you hear adages like you've got to delegate. On the other side, you don't want to delegate too much to where now you're disengaged. There's this, there's these two extremes, the tyranny and the obfuscation of responsibility, and it's our people, customers and employees and shareholders, like board, that help managements not swing too far one way or the other. But it's constantly moving. If you're looking at this on YouTube, like, extreme right, extreme left, it's moving towards the middle, and it's moving right, left, and it's moving back, almost like like a crazy thermometer, like one of those radiation signs in horror movies where the radiation is going crazy and it keeps beeping, flying back and forth the dial. Here's the values help decay, but they need to be acted out. So values, the role of accountability. Accountability, yeah. If it comes as a consequence of the values being clear and those in positions of absolute authority, influence, and power to be responsible, then the values they'll act out will create more responsibility because they are able to handle feedback. The feedback loops are there. So there's accountability. People will tell each other the truth about how they're behaving, and individuals will reorient themselves into what it is they're supposed to be doing, why they're supposed to be doing it, how they're supposed to be doing it. And there's a lot of nuance here because, like I said, accountability, if it's given in speech or taken in action, that means people are quitting or getting fired. And, the big question is why? Not everyone that quits, it was the right person. Oh, glad they quit. Not everyone that gets fired. Oh, I'm glad they got fired. You know, there's a percentage of those that get fired that are like Christ, they are crucified. They were right, we're wrong. Percentage that maybe they're murderers, that they were supposed to, go to jail. Then on those that quit, there's a percentage that leave, you know, a tyrannical country like North Korea, and they go to America. I'm just, and then there's or let's say, they leave Germany before the Third Reich. They saw it coming, or right in the beginning. Or there's people that leave a country where they had the option to leave. It wasn't, they weren't fleeing from an objective tyranny. They were fleeing from they were just leaving, they had a subjective aim to go maybe to, their country of origin, and they could come back. So but it's about information, understanding, and being, what is people, what are people leaving, or us asking them to leave, helping us learn about ourselves. And ultimately, because the purpose of a business is to create a customer, as Drucker would say, to solve problems, and to, through providing services and products. What is the marketplace telling us? What are our people telling us? What does this have to do with the role of accountability? Well, the role of accountability, it's like, what do we mean by accountability? What are you actually saying? Whoever's talking about accountability, why are we talking about accountability? Is it because we're less responsible than we think we are? Or is it something else? Are we talking about it? Like, why are we talking about accountability? Why do we have to talk about accountability? We should just, I think that if we're talking about accountability, something's very, very wrong. We're not using our space time to talk about things that matter because it's an oxymoron. We're talking about a consequence. We're talking, it's like, it's too late to talk about it. We need to be responsible and talk about the problems and the future and where we're going and why and how we can, we need to be spending our energy talking about things that are real and literal, not abstract and proverbial. Number four, you don't hold yourself accountable. Yeah, I mean that's a big. I don't hold myself accountable. I am responsible on a spectrum, and other people around me hold me accountable. By telling me the truth of what they think, and I am going to increase or decrease the likelihood of getting truth to people around me based on how I relate to them when they tell me the truth. I might condition people around me not to tell me the truth. This happens in businesses as they grow. You have the yes man effect, surrounded by people that are conditioned not to tell a person the truth, a person that is in a position of authority, influence, and power. One, could be argued that, that dynamic, think about it. If follow the incentives, you follow the incentives, you get you understand the outcomes. That's where people that's where advisors come in. They're accountability mechanisms for organizations that can easily become corrupt from their own success because think about it. Uh, it's a very high. The integrity of the people has a relationship with the integrity of the leadership because the people they have one source of income to feed and clothe and take care of ultimately who they're responsible for, which is their families. And if an ownership makes it hard for people to tell the truth, they'll omit. They'll be less likely to tell the truth because they have so much to lose. Right? They have so much to lose. They have if they lose their income, they lose their potentially their family. Whereas those outside of an organization that are not subservient to it as one income, but could have many customers, in this case, like a true advisory firm, true as in they tell the truth, they're disincentivized to omit or lie or shade because they from just a basic mathematical they've got 100 customers and they tell everybody the truth. A percentage of them will fire them for telling the truth, but they're incentivized at a greater likelihood to tell the truth because the employee has to have a higher character to tell the truth that they lose everything and they tell the truth to a corrupt institution and the institution. So just think of it that dynamic. You know, accountability is given in speech or taken in force. I quit or you're fired. Responsibility is lived. The ability to respond, to speak truth and keep commitments and act and relate in a constructive way with others in the world. That's on a spectrum of each of us as individuals. And we all have blind spots, me included, of where we are or not responsible. And other people in our lives that know us, that spend time with us, that relate to us through life can help us with our blind spots. And if they stop helping us in our blind spots, we're not being held accountable by them because there's not enough truth. So then we'll be less able to respond to those blind spots and then just, continues to decay the responsibility of ourselves and undermine the influence if we're influencing others in our life of responsibility. It's catching a falling knife. So the role of accountability in a business culture is a consequence of personal responsibility, and it has a relationship with how people tell the truth and that people tell the truth, and that an organization can develop over time its value system, its stories that inspire people towards something greater than themselves. It's language and symbolism and rituals to increase responsibility, and accountability will naturally follow. Wow. We'll continue this on the next time of the Culture Matters podcast. Follow me on Jay Doran underscore Jay Doran underscore the Culture Man on Instagram for more culture topics. Leave us a review, please, on the Culture Matters podcast. I will see you next time.